Have you ever wondered what it takes to be happy? What even is happiness anyway? Welcome to Lead Well with Jackie. I'm your host, Jackie Butler, and today I am joined by Declan Edwards. Declan is a happiness researcher, author, and the founder of BU Happiness College, a for-purpose organisation dedicated to helping people and workplaces thrive by developing the practical, evidence-based skills of happiness. Welcome, Declan. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
So I think that most of us, maybe even all of us, think that happiness is an emotion or that something that is kind of transient. So I'm really wanting to start right at the beginning, which is, what is happiness?
Yeah, look, I'm glad we're starting at the beginning because it's an important spot to start. And you're right. A lot of people, and myself included for many years, have this relationship with happiness where we think of it primarily, yes, as a feeling, but we also think of it as a very fleeting feeling, something that comes and goes quite quickly. And one of the first big paradigm shifts for me when I was learning about the skills and science of happiness was that happiness is more of an emotional umbrella term than a distinct feeling in and of itself. And what I mean by that is we can look at all these incredible feelings that sit underneath that umbrella term. So yes, joy and excitement and accomplishment are forms of happiness, and they are quite fleeting. That would fit our normal relationship with it and definition of it. But contentment is also a form of happiness. Connection is an expression of happiness. Meaning and purpose and contribution are expressions of happiness. Feeling pride, feeling playful. Like, there are so many emotions and feelings that sit under that emotional umbrella term. And so when we broaden our definition of happiness, what I've found over the years is it allows me to find and cultivate moments of happiness, even in really unexpected times, like in really difficult times, times of stress, times of overwhelm, times of grief and loss. I can normally find happiness in some form. It might just not always be joy or excitement or that, yellow smiley face happiness that we normally think of.
I love that. That really resonates for me as well, actually, because I think that when we think, oh, you just want to be happy, or, like it's kind of an old-fashioned thing to say, just cheer up, just be happy, put on a happy face, whatever. I think that we do kind of pigeonhole that to continue to replicate or emulate what our interpretation of happiness is, but you've kind of really thrown the net much wider now. And it's like, okay, well, maybe joy isn't feasible for me in this moment, but perhaps I can grasp some form of contentment or accomplishment or some other element that fits within the umbrella. Is that a reasonable interpretation?
Yeah, spot on. You've absolutely nailed it. And what that allows us to do is challenge this notion of, as much as I'm a happiness researcher, I'm also massively against toxic positivity, which is the idea that we should feel only happy all the time. It's not realistic, nor is it human. One of my favorite expressions is if we hope to live a fully fulfilled human life, we must expect that we will experience the full range of human emotion. Right? At some point in our life, we'll experience every human emotion possible to us. And I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, the more we broaden our perspective of happiness, we go, hang on, happiness doesn't only exist in the absence of sadness or anger or fear or these other feelings that we more wrestle with. Find a form of happiness somewhere intertwined with them. It might not be, sometimes I say it might not be the main course in the meal, like it might not be the main focus, but it's still there somewhere. It's like a little side, it's an accompaniment. Even in times of stress, we can have moments of grit or resilience or accomplishment or pride. In times of loss and grief, we can have connection and love. So the more we broaden it, the more I find myself and also others that we lead at BU Happiness College trying to encourage people to seek out and cultivate little expressions of happiness.
Find the glimmers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so I studied emotional intelligence. I'm an emotional intelligence coach. And one of the things, we don't think about positive or negative emotions. We think about move toward and move away emotions, right? So what I'm hearing is that happiness is a combination of move toward emotions. So they're the feelings that are more pleasant to experience rather than just an emotion in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I use the term, what do we want to marinate in and what do we want to navigate through?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time our default, right, is because we all have this negative cognitive bias. It's a beautiful part of the brain that's been left over from many generations of evolution,
Mm-hmm.
where we do tend to naturally marinate a little bit more in the tough times, right? Like if 10 things go well at work that week and one thing goes bad, we tend to ruminate on and remember and sit in the bad moment rather than celebrate the good moments. We know this about the human brain. Thankfully, we can retrain it. But so often I go, hey, if you look back on the last month, chances are you've been accidentally marinating in some really difficult moments, experiences, memories, challenges, and you've been navigating so quickly through the good moments. We just
Yeah.
skip past them. It's like we press fast forward on the remote of life. What would happen if we started practicing the opposite? If we learned how to savor and lengthen and marinate in the good moments, kind of like a little simmer sauce of good, right? And then in the challenging times, because they're real, they're going to happen, right? Like there's nothing I can teach people about the skills and science of happiness that will stop difficult times from happening.
Mm-hmm.
Goal is we help people feel equipped to navigate those difficult times way more effectively and efficiently.
Mm. So this is kind of deviating a little bit, but would you say then that the more we're able to cultivate happiness, the more resilient we become as we do navigate more challenging times?
Yeah, I definitely believe so. And I think even resilience is a funny thing that I sometimes have a challenge with our normal colloquial definition of, because I think there's a misconception that to be resilient means that you can just keep pushing through the tough times.
Mm.
But resilience in its purest form is actually about adaptability. It's about adaptation. It's about going, hey, this is a challenging time and I have the capacity. So I have the emotional resources, like the energy resources, and the knowledge and the support network to change direction here, to adapt accordingly to the challenge at hand. It's not about just being stubborn and going, I will push through at all costs, because that's what leads to burnout. It's about going, hey, I need to adjust my approach to life right now because the chapter I'm currently in or the challenge I'm facing at home or at work, whatever it may be, is demanding different skills of me. What skills can I bring to the table? That's resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Resilience is intention, really, isn't it? It's about being present in the moment and choosing how you respond rather than being reactive. And I always like to think of it as so often it's like we just lift our feet and we get swept along in the current. And I think resilience, intention, and from what I'm gleaning, happiness is actually about, you know, choosing which direction we want to go and moving in that direction, utilizing our energy, channeling our energy toward that intention.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
So, can we measure happiness?
Yeah, I believe so. Look, not objectively,
Mm.
until there's some Black Mirror episode future that we all live in where there's some sort of device that's monitoring dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin and endorphins in our brain,
Could
which,
happen. I can see
look,
it.
could happen and terrifies me. So let's hope
Yeah.
it happen 2 to 8 times soon. Look, we can, but it's going to be more through subjective measures, right? Which is just getting people to reflect in on basically their own subjective well-being, right? Their own self-reported levels of happiness. This is something we've been doing for the last 8 years at my social enterprise at BU Happiness College. We measure people's familiarity and confidence with the skills of happiness. So we ask them about skills like emotional intelligence, which is,
Mhm.
one of the big contributors to happiness. We ask them about communication, about resilience, about living in alignment with their values. We ask about these skills. We measure how confident and competent they are at them. We also ask them to measure, just in a subjective well-being score, how do you feel about these different areas of your life? And it generates a happiness score for them. And what we've found is about 4 years ago, we found that on average, when people came to the college and they were invested in learning the skills and science of happiness, their self reported happiness went up by about 57% in a year. And then even after they graduated, it still sat at about 35% higher than before they started. So there's this massive ramp up as they're learning it actively. But then there's this tail effect that even long after they're no longer
Mhm.
actively learning the skills stay with them. Like these are skills that you can use anywhere in life, regardless of what job you do, regardless of, what's happening in your life personally. These skills last and we see that. So it's something that, my team and I have become quite proud of, to be able to go, hey, the long-term outcome of this work is if people put in an intentional year of learning this, long term, they're 35% happier. Short term, they're 57% happier.
It's amazing. Like, they're significant numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy for us, when we look at research. So I know you have a health background. I am originally a nutritionist. I have a health background as well.
That's my major. I did nutrition
Oh,
and dietetics for my health science degree. There you go.
there you go. We're twins. Um, and I think so often we can look at a percentage or we can hear a percentage, and we really sort of I was going to say shunt because it's one of my favorite words, but into the into the rational
Mm.
brain, and we really go, oh, okay, so that means, but actually, the life impacts of a 57% increase in happiness. And
Yeah.
not only for the person experiencing the happiness, and I see this with emotional intelligence as well, when people increase those skills, it has a ripple effect, but it also just, I don't know, I can't even articulate it because the impacts that it has, it's not just oh yeah, I feel, 57% better. It's like, do you know what I mean? Like, it is huge. That can have such a huge impact on every aspect of life, on someone's health, on someone's contentment, on someone's mental health, and also, not to sort of really overstate it, but even longevity, the length of their life can be really impacted by that
Yeah, I know.
ongoing increase.
I know there was a study that found that people who had cultivated a sense of optimism or hope about their life and future, which are both really correlated with happiness, the impact that that had on their life expectancy was more impactful than whether or not they were smokers. And
Wow.
one of the jokes that came out of that study was like, so if someone gives up smoking, but they become really unhopeful and really upset and unhappy because of it, there's almost an argument to be made that it's better to let them be a happy smoker than be an unhappy non-smoker, which I'm like, I don't think that's the conclusion. Like, we can joke about it, but maybe that's not suggest that to people. But yeah, you're right. Like, happiness and optimism and hope has a huge impact on every area of life. That ripple effect you spoke about. I know there was a study that came out of some of the Scandi countries that found there's a measurable impact on people's happiness up to 3 degrees of separation.
Wow.
Right, which means when that's taken in the context of someone comes to BU Happiness College, they increase their happiness by, somewhere from 35 to 57%, whether it's short term or long term. Their partner's sister's best friend has a notable increase in their happiness levels because of the work that this first person is doing. And that's why, like, speaking of hope, that's what encourages me, right? Because, I set out to dedicate my career to this idea of growing global happiness. I fundamentally cannot achieve it alone or directly.
Mm.
Right? The only way we're changing happiness of the entire global population is through that ripple effect. It's through the contagion effect of happiness, which is why I'm such a firm believer that the more people who learn the skills and science of happiness, the better the world becomes. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? Because it creates this real eagerness, like, we've got to tell the people. Somebody tell the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've touched on something that you've touched on a few things there, and I'm going to circle back. But one of the things that you sort of talked about in terms of that initial, 1 year increase and then that longer term increase is this idea of a happiness set point.
Mm.
Can you talk to us? So the reason that I asked this is because years ago when I was working in health, we were doing a mental health seminar. I used to be in the education space, and one of the people on my team were like, I want to talk to you about this idea of set point. So, and since I have been fascinated by it, so can you tell us a bit about what is a set point?
Yeah, so this kind of comes out of the biopsychosocial model of mental health, which is one that I subscribe to. And to break that down for people listening, it's this idea that our mental and emotional well-being, or our happiness in life, we might call it, is influenced by biological factors, by psychological factors, and by sociological factors. So, in other words, what's happening with our body and our neurochemistry and what happens, physiologically to us, what happens psychologically to us. This is, have we built the skills and knowledge and resources, like all the stuff that we've spoken about, emotional intelligence, compassion, empathy, self-awareness. These are all psychological skill sets that, unless you've kind of gone and learnt about them, it's very rare that you'd just happen across them in our normal education system or at home. And
Mm-hmm.
then the sociological impact is, yeah, what's happening outside of you and around you? Like, what's going on with your living situation, financial impact and stress there, what's happening with your work, and what's happening with relationships and other people, and how does that impact us? So we view happiness through that lens of all three have a role. If we look at the biological part of biopsychosocial, model, there is this notion that's come out of the research of a set point of happiness or a set point of well-being. We're now starting to challenge that a little bit and start thinking of it more as a set range rather than a
Okay.
set point, right? Because set point was very deterministic. So the idea
Mm.
was, the reason this came out of the research was they're like, hey, we're noticing that people can have massive changes in their sociological impacts to happiness. So, for the classic example that's always given is they were measuring people's happiness before they won the lottery and
Yeah.
after they won the lottery.
Yeah.
And you'd think, whoa, that's a huge sociological change, right? Surely that has a massive impact on their happiness. It does for a very short term. It goes up really quick. And then they found, I think from memory, I'm casting my mind back a while ago during this study, it was somewhere like 6 to 9 months later, it wasn't that long, that it returned to roughly what it was before. And then they looked at other people who went through really challenging and traumatizing and difficult times, and they found a percentage of that group would end up with PTSD and would have a long-term drop to happiness, and they'd really need some support in those psychological skills. A small percentage would have what's called post-traumatic growth, where they'd actually, their happiness would go up almost as a result because they were kind of thrust into learning those skills and they needed to practice their psychological skills, and they had good support networks that rallied. And then there'd be a massive amount of people, like the majority in the middle, that didn't go into PTSD or PTG, like post-traumatic growth. They had this drop in happiness. And then again, about a year later, there was kind of coming back to roughly what it was before the traumatic event. And so, happiness researchers and psychologists were going, this is odd. What's happening here? What we now think is happening is rather than a set point, is we have this set sort of range. So
Mm-hmm.
we might, like the listeners might know someone in their life who is kind of naturally a little bit more optimistic on the side of things. Like if I was looking at a scale of -10 to +10, they probably sit more in that -3 to +10.
Mm-hmm.
You might know someone who's just a little bit more naturally pessimistic. They sort of sit in the -10 to 3. Sometimes people have a narrow emotional range and they're kind of naturally stoic, and we see they sit in kind of like -2 to +2. And then there's other people who have this massive emotional range of -10 to +10. Whether that's nature versus nurture, like, there's ongoing debate about that. I think it's both. I think there's part of our biology that has a role to play in that. There's part of our upbringing and how we've been parented that has a role in that. But also for me, as someone who works in happiness coaching and focusing on particularly those psychosocial skills, right? So the psychosocial part of biopsychosocial, I kind of don't care what someone's happiness set range is,
Mm-hmm.
because if they're doing the things and learning the skills that allow them to sit on the higher end of their set range more often than the lower end, they're going to feel better than if they were sitting on the lower end than the higher end. So it's kind of irrelevant to me whether they're a -10 to +3 person. If I can give them the skills and tools and resources to be more in the upper side of that as much as possible, and when they are in the lower side, know how to come through it quicker, like that navigating we spoke about earlier, they're going to feel better. And same if someone is -3 to +10, kind of irrelevant to me, right? If they learn the skills and tools to put themselves on the higher end more often and savor it and to navigate when they're in their lower end of their set range, they're going to feel better. So it's kind of, for me, it takes away the comparison effect. I think too many people are like, oh, well, that person's actually optimistic and that's why I could never have. Doesn't matter, right? Like focus on what's in your control.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the it's a different psychological thing, like the resilience zone, right? So, and if I'm understanding you right or correctly, it's like whatever our range is, we're going to ebb and flow, and we're going to move through the higher end and the lower end of the range. And when we learn and cultivate happiness and these skills, what we're doing is we're increasing our chances of spending more time in the higher component of our natural range and being able to be more transient in the lower, rather than completely shifting our range or expanding our range. It's more about the time spent. Is that
Yeah,
right?
spot on. Yeah, and because the reality is there's not too much that we know about that can directly address the biological side of biopsychosocial. There's like some pharmaceutical support that can be really useful for some people's mental health. There's exercise, meditation, and there's some research around nutrition and gut health and its impact. That's kind of it, right? So I'm kind of like, hey, if you're, exercising, meditating, looking after your gut health, and if pharmaceutical support is right for you and you've spoken to your doctor about that, that's part of your, plan and your toolkit for well-being. You're doing that stuff. That's kind of the most you can do with the biological side. So now we need to look more at the psycho and social sides, right? We need to look at our psychological skill sets for happiness. We need to look at what's happening around us and externally to us. And I would put them in that order. I think a lot of people make the mistake of going, oh, if I change my job or my relationship or I make more money or I change the sociological impacts, then I'll be happy. And in happiness research, we call that the happiness trap or the hedonic treadmill.
Yep.
I'll be happy when. Like we're always kind of
Yep.
changing the external change. External changes do matter. They do have an impact on our happiness, but it's normally less of an impact than people predict. And the internal skills, learning things like emotional intelligence, self-awareness, like all the stuff we've been speaking about, those internal skills have a much larger impact on people's happiness than they often predict. So I'd recommend starting there and then you do the external changes.
And I often think that that is where the idea of this genetic, it's not even genetic predisposition, but I would refer to it as like this heredity in terms of our happiness or our set point comes from. And we see this a lot in other sort of more lifestyle health conditions as well, where it's not necessarily that there is a genetic component that's determining how happy you are from your parents, but it's more the skills that you're, and we know this from emotional intelligence as well, research as well, where the more emotionally intelligent a parent is, the more able they are to model those behaviors and teach those skill sets to their children, who will in turn become more emotionally intelligent adults. And so the cycle continues. And I imagine it's exactly the same with the other components of happiness, right? So if an adult or parent, and also teachers and other influential adults, if they don't have those skill sets, they're not able to, most importantly, model them, but also to pass them on to their kids. So their kids might naturally be less, or more pessimistic, let's say, because they haven't learned the skills.
100%. Right. It's one of the most common questions I get asked is people going, whether I'm speaking at a conference or people listen to a podcast, whatever it may be, they go, oh, this sounds really good. I wish my partner learnt this, or I wish my child learnt this, or I wish. And it's so funny how often we other the happiness
Yes.
skills and we go, I wish everyone else did this. And I'm like, hey, look, I agree. But also, are you doing it? Like, and, I think that there's so much to be said about be the change that you want to see in the world. Like, start with self. If you want your children, or if you're a teacher, if you want your students, or if you're a leader, if you want your team to model and to practice and implement skills of happiness, you kind of need to lead by example on that. And
Yeah.
that is kind of confronting for some people, but it's also, for me, in my perspective, very freeing and empowering, because it's
Mm.
like, yeah, that's in your control. That's your responsibility, right? It's something that you can take ownership of. You cannot force, even for me as, a happiness coach and a researcher, I often say to people when they come to the college, I cannot make you be happy. Like, it's not my responsibility to force happiness upon you. I can influence your happiness. I can support your happiness development, but you have to take lead on this, right? This is your responsibility. And I think if parents and leaders and teachers and educators and the helpers in the world took more of that approach of like, my role is to influence and support the happiness of others, and to take ownership and responsibility for my happiness and how much I model and lead by example, geez, we'd have such a good ripple effect coming from that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And gosh, we have so many synergies. But I always say to my coaching clients, the work happens in between the sessions. We can talk about all of the things, and I can share with you all of the frameworks and strategies and tools. But it's how well you implement them that is going to determine the progress that you make. And when I was thinking about, I'm going to be chatting with you today, and what do I really want to cover off? I have 3 sons, I have 3 children. And that saying, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And what's really hitting me is the way that you can influence how happy your children are is to focus on how happy you are first, which I think is hugely impactful for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think there's so many analogies that we have in society that people are somewhat familiar with that make sense to that. The whole idea of, put your oxygen mask on before helping others secure theirs. You can't pour from an empty cup. Like, these are all cliches for a reason. But I think a lot of them have this reactive component to them where we think of them only in emergency situations, right? Like on the plane's going down. Quick, put your mask on, then help others. Oh my God, people are, dying of thirst. Pour, pour, pour. You need to have something in your cup to pour out. But this isn't just reactive work. Like, we need to do this proactively. How do we just day by day, just consistently show up and model the skill sets and of happiness, and model as often as possible the best version of ourselves, whilst giving ourselves compassion that we're not always going to be the best version of ourselves. Like, I often say to people, hey, I'm a human being first and a happiness researcher second,
Yeah.
right? Which means I don't always get it right. I stuff it up a lot of times, right? So we need to be ourselves with that compassion. But if we have, to your point earlier, you mentioned intentionality being such a key part. If
Mm.
we are intentional about just day by day, moment by moment, doing the best we can to model these skills, we will, I promise, we will have a dramatic and profoundly positive impact through that ripple effect.
Yeah, so I would like to share with you this analogy that I use all the time, if that's okay. And all of my analogies today are about water. I don't know what's going on there. I'll look it up. Um, so the way that I like to think of it is if we are like a buoy in the ocean, right? And if we are floating, then we are at the mercy of the environment, the waves, the storms that come through, and we find ourselves moving around at the mercy of those external impacts. What I'm hearing, and I use this analogy when I'm talking about values and purpose and intention, and I'm going to add happiness as a critical component. Those things make up the chain that anchor the buoy to the ground, to the ocean floor. And so when we have a really robust anchor that we build over time every day, then when the storms come through and the current gets strong and there are huge waves, yes, we still move a bit, but we're not swept away by it. We're more able to sort of sit in our what we would call like grounded confidence, or in who we truly are as a person. We're anchored by all of those critical things, so we're more able to take on those external insults, I guess.
Yeah, speaking my language with that one. I agree to that.
You're welcome to use it.
I'll pinch it. There's no trademark on it. Everyone uses it now.
Yeah. I actually think I got it from a
Gift to
client.
the
So
world.
we'll just pay it forward here.
Yeah, go for it. Speak around.
Okay, so what are the most common myths about happiness?
I think there's kind of a big three that I speak to, right, when it comes to happiness. And I'll put them in the terms of like, we often mistakenly think of happiness as future oriented. So that's the I'll be happy when.
Yeah.
So that happiness follows success. That's the myth there. If I succeed at something, if I achieve something, then I will be happy. Like happiness is the reward that comes afterwards. So that's a very common myth. The second one is this myth that happiness is an individualized pursuit. And I kind of blame self help for this, to be honest. Like, I think there's been a big rise over the last 40 years of self help. And the dark underbelly of self help is if you want to be happier, this is what you need to do and what you're doing wrong and what you need to do better. And it's so individualized. And I used to be a massive believer in the saying, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is, my responsibility. And to a degree, I still believe that. We just had the conversation around like, I can't make anyone else happy. Other people's happiness is not, I can't be responsible for that, but I can influence it. And we know from all the literature and resources and research that because of that contagion effect, because of the pro-social impact of happiness, like we are inherently a social species. And happiness is so closely tied to our connection to others. And so I now believe that happiness, the spark of happiness starts within us. That's where we take ownership and responsibility. But nourishing that spark happens between us.
Mm.
It happens collectively. It happens in community. It happens through contribution, right? It happens through being part of something bigger than ourselves. And so, if we challenge this notion that it's future oriented, right? That I'll be happy when, if we challenge this notion that happiness is individualized, and if we challenge the notion, like we did earlier, that happiness is fleeting, that we go, well, actually, parts of happiness are fleeting. There are expressions and forms of happiness that are very fleeting. But there's other types of happiness that are pretty resilient. They last a long time. Like that contentment, that, connection, meaning, purpose, those last quite a while. They take longer to build. They take more effort to cultivate, but they pay off for a longer time. And so if we start to challenge those and go, well, hang on, what's the opposite to all those, right? If we go, hang on, how do I cultivate happiness here and now and in the future and in the past? I believe in the three tenses of happiness, right? Like we can have past focused happiness in terms of looking back on positive memories and experiences. If you've ever had Facebook or your phone be like, hey, this is what was happening 3 years ago. And you're looking and go, I forgot about that trip or that moment that I took with my kids. Or like, wow, that's such a nice moment. That is past oriented happiness. We have this bank of happiness that a lot of us forget to check back in on and make withdrawals from. Then we have present happiness, which is how do we cultivate happiness here and now? Right? How do I have a good relationship with myself currently? How do I have a good relationship with my life currently? And then future-oriented happiness, which is, yes, how do I still have goals that matter to me? How do I still have things that I move towards? If we can learn how to do all three, it reduces the risk of that I'll be happy when trap, right? And then the third one is, as we said before, we challenge the notion that happiness just means fleeting joy. And we go, actually, happiness is an umbrella term that means a lot of things. It broadens our perspective. It broadens our opportunity to hone those different types of happiness.
Yeah. Okay. That all three of those, I imagine, they're so common, and I think a lot of us do really believe them. And the first one was one that I was really interested in because I see it all the time as well. Like, when I get through this course, or when I get married, or when I get that job, or I see it a lot as a bit of an antidote to imposter syndrome, for example. It's like, when I know enough, then I'll be enough. Or if I'm really perfect at this, then I will. And of course, tomorrow never comes, right? Like, so we're constantly kicking the can down the road. So I like that idea of, if we can anchor our happiness in both past, present, and future, then we're not tying happiness to our goals. We might be tying other components that sit under the umbrella, like ambition or well, not even confidence, but success or accomplishment or whatever. Those things we still might get from achievement, but we're not anchoring it, because we also have today and yesterday.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's less of a gamble then, right? And I don't know if yourself or your listeners have come across, there's a great book by Bronnie Ware, who was an Australian palliative nurse, and she did one of the longest running studies onto what do people regret on their deathbed.
Yes, I'm familiar. Yeah.
Great book called The Five Regrets of the Dying. And she just found, regardless of age, background, culture, experience, gender, these five regrets kept commonly coming up. It's one of the pivotal works and books that set me on my path, because I would have come across that a bit over 10 years ago before I started studying happiness and running a happiness college. And I realized, I was like, oh, I'm currently on track to have a few of those regrets. Like, if I look at those five regrets, it was a slap in the face. I'll be real with you. Because I went, if I don't change anything, I reckon at least three of those five, that's what I'm on track for. And it kind of struck a bit of fear into me. I was like, I don't want to get to the end of my life and look back with those regrets. And one of the most common regrets, and I would change the wording on a little bit from the perspective that happiness is a skill. Bronnie said one of the most common regrets people had was, I wish I'd allowed myself to be happier.
Hmm.
Right. And I think part of that is because we're always kicking the can down the road, chasing happiness. We forget to be happy now and to cultivate happiness in the past. I would change the wording of that a little bit, because I don't think happiness is just a choice. I don't think you just like wake up and go, today I choose to be happy. I would say, I wish I learned how to be happier.
Yeah.
Right. I wish I learned the skills of happiness. That would be the payoff. Right. And if people can do that, like it astounds me. It concerns me that that is one of the most top five most common regrets people have. They get to the end of their life for what? To look back and go, I wish I was happier. Oh, like I now believe, and this might be a bit, blunt with people, but I now believe that the pursuit of success at the expense of happiness is the most common form of failure in our society.
Oof. That's, yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I think we've misdefined success, and it's a similar version of kicking the can down the road. I'll be happy when. It's like, well, if I have all of these external status symbols, then I will be successful, and success will allow me to be happy. Or, I do a bit of coaching with people who are moving through retirement, and I see a lot of like, but I've been waiting my whole life for this, and now I don't know who I am.
Yeah, because their identity is built around everything else. Yeah. Yeah.
I did a program on positive intelligence a couple of years ago, and the way this person said this has stuck with me. He said, millions of people die every day waiting to be happy.
Mm.
And I remember when I heard it and I wrote it down, and I got like, it was so overwhelming, because it's like, yeah, what are you waiting for?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Especially
know?
can be cultivated here and now. Actually, the retirement part reminded me of the retirement is so often perceived as this promised land of happiness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you follow the societal blueprint for happiness. You go to school, maybe you go to uni or TAFE, you get the job, you get the partner, you get, the house, the mortgage, the kids, the dog, the picket fence, yada, yada. You take 2 holidays a year or 1 holiday a year, you build, build, build. And then you reach the promised land of happiness, which is retirement. And on average, you die 5 to 7 years later.
Yeah.
That's the blunt reality of it, right? On average, you've got 5 to 7 years after you retire. That is, in my mind, not a good trade-off.
Yeah.
Right? And so it does
Agreed.
to, how do we cultivate happiness now? And not how do we prioritize happiness at the sacrifice of success. No, no, no. Like, I believe you can be both, but you've got to lead with happiness. And that's not just my belief. That's Sean Aker, who was one of the pioneering researchers of happiness, wrote this great book called The Happiness Advantage. And he found that when people, instead of saying, hey, success comes first, happiness comes second, those who prioritized learning the skills and science of happiness first made better decisions. And because they made better decisions and they were able to take bigger risks and they were able to pursue things more intentionally, back to the intentionality point, they actually achieved higher degrees of success. They had better marriages and relationships. They achieved more at work. They had more likely to get pay rises. Like they had better physical health. Like all of these positive side effects that we would deem as successful living came as a byproduct of happiness. And so it almost seems like for, a few hundred years, we've had the relationship between success and happiness completely backwards, and it's time for us to change it.
I think I probably enmesh them a little bit. And for me, success is happiness.
Mm.
Like I see the delineation, and maybe there's a bit of a Venn diagram, and we're talking about the overlap. But I just think, and I've had not lots of, but significant career change and moved into this coaching space, and so maybe that my level of intention is a little bit different to the standard. But I just think if I am experiencing joy and presence in each moment, that's pretty successful, right? But having said that, still have a mortgage and still have goals and dreams.
For me, where I've landed in the relationship between them is like, A, both are important to define on your terms. And like, for everyone listening to this conversation, I'd encourage you to do that because at the end of the day, who the hell am I? I'm not an expert on you, right? Like, yes, I've spent over a decade now studying the science of happiness, but I have not lived your life. So take what you like from me and ditch what you don't like, right? Like, I do not claim to have the one size fits all answer to a happy and successful life for 8 billion people on the planet. What I do know for a fact is when people get more intentional about defining happiness and success on their terms, and they have the resources and the skills and the support to then pursue those terms, good things happen, right? So for me, the way I delineate between them is happiness is a little bit more intrinsic and success is kind of like, what are the extrinsic, tangible expressions of that? So if there was like a fly on the wall following me throughout my life, what would it see and be able to point to? That would be kind of the success measures. It can't see what I'm feeling inside of me. It can't see my psychological skill sets necessarily. It can't see my own thoughts and feelings, right? But that would be more my happiness approach. That's kind of how they relate to me. And again, I prioritize happiness first, and that feeds success rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I love that. So you've mentioned a couple of times or alluded to these ideas of these pillars or these particular buckets of skills. So emotional intelligence, communication. Can you outline what they are?
We probably don't have time to go through all of them. We teach
just the heading. Like what are the headings of each bucket?
Yeah, look, we teach at BU. We teach 70 distinct skill sets.
Right.
For
You're right. We don't have time for 70.
Yeah, so I mean, we could probably just.
Theories.
I wonder if I could wrap them really quick. I've joked before. I'm like, if I could get them into a 3-minute wrap to be like, here's all the skills of happiness that we should learn.
That would be fun.
It would be great. That's the
challenge. To-do list, Declan.
My to-do list. I don't have the wrap prepared today. The part of my challenge over the last 8 years of running a happiness college has been like, well, what are the most important ones? Like, is there an order to do these in? Because 70 is kind of overwhelming. And also, 70 is not necessary for everyone. Like, we have a lot of people come to the college, and I'm like, you don't actually need to work on that bucket. You need to work on this bucket, right? Like, and we kind of direct them that way. Over the last 2.5 years in particular, I've been very, very dedicated to going, what's the right ones to start with? And the reason that happened is I actually started negotiating and talking about a book deal. And I went to them and said, we teach 70 skills of happiness. And they went, if you try to teach 70 skills of happiness in the book, this is going to be like the British encyclopedia. Like there's going to be 11 tomes. They're going to take up a whole bookshelf. No one's reading.
It's not super catchy, is it?
No, it's like, here's 70 skills for a happier life. Go have a crack at them. And she went, what are the ones, if you could narrow it down to 10, the ones that you think are most applicable to most people? So generalizable to most of the population. And we got down to those 10 and I started writing. And I was writing away. And I went, hey, this is going to be a huge book because I want to do each of them really well. So then we narrowed it down to 5. And so the 5 we landed on, in no particular order, well, kind of in a bit of an order, you'll be very happy to hear. The first skill that we teach in happiness, I think is the most important, is expanding your emotional intelligence. And I will be a little cheeky with that one because that is kind of a bucket in and of itself. There's a bunch of skills under it, right? Yeah. So like expand your emotional intelligence is one of the most commonly researched and spoken about, things associated with living a happier, more successful life. But within that, there's also micro skills of like, hey, what's your emotional literacy like? Can you name your distinct emotions? What's your emotional awareness like? What's your emotional understanding? What's your emotional acceptance like? Like there's all these sub threads. But I kind of got cheeky, when we're writing the book, and I was like, I'm going to put it all under the skill of emotional intelligence so I can teach a few extras in there. So that
Yeah.
would be the first one. Second one is learn to introspect,
Mm,
learn to look inwards. And the reason that's so crucial, particularly in this day and age, is we are living in an economy that's driven by attention.
mm,
The wealthiest companies in the world are normally the ones that have captured attention. Social
mhm,
media, news channels, media, right? Their job is to get us focusing externally as much as possible. But we know that I mentioned before that spark of happiness starts internally. And there's so many people so disconnected from themselves because we haven't practiced and honed the skill of looking inwards. And whether you do that through meditation, journaling, coaching, therapy, counseling, like have some sort of way of looking inwards and understanding your inner world. It's
mhm,
crucial. The third one, if I was to kind of rapidly run through the five, third skill is then retraining your brain. So that's learning about, hey, we have a negative cognitive bias. Our brain is a little wired towards looking for the bad in ourselves and in the world. So practicing things like gratitude, broadening our perspective, like learning about neuroplasticity and how we rewire the brain. Super
mhm,
important. Fourth one is then really get to know yourself, right? So you're now starting to look inwards a little bit more. Start defining yourself on your terms. And what I mean by that is, I remember this one hit home for me because years ago I went to one of my first coaches and he said, "What do you want from me? What are we trying to learn here?" And I said, to be honest, I'd like more self confidence, higher self worth. I'd like better self compassion and self care practices. And I said all these things. I'd like to have higher self trust. I kind of ran off this list of 7 things. And he went, "You ever notice they all start with the same word?" I went, "Ah, yeah,
mhm,
that's interesting. That's always self." And he goes, "Cool. So tell me about yourself. Who's Declan? What does he believe in? What does he value? What does he stand for? What's happiness and success mean by his definition, not someone else's?" And I went, "I have no freaking clue. Like, I have
mm,
no idea how to answer that." He goes, "So can you see now you're trying to form a relationship with a stranger?
mm,
Like, you're trying to have this compassionate, caring, trusting, confident relationship with someone you don't even know yet." Right. So that's such a crucial skill of like, get to know your values, get to know your character strengths, define happiness and success by your terms. And then the final skill that I write about in the book is then bringing direction to your life. So that's where we start to look at the future. Like all those first four are present skill sets.
yeah.
The last one is then going, hey, now that we've built the ability to manage our emotions and mind well, now that we're looking inwards, now that we're retraining our brain, now that we have a better understanding of ourselves, what do we want our life to look like? And that's where we start getting intentional about impact and goal setting and vision and, what are we moving towards that matters to us? Most people try to jump ahead to that skill
Mhm.
without laying the foundations of the first four. So when we finally narrowed it down after 2.5 years of work and research and writing, those were the five we landed on. And if I could click my fingers and everyone who listened to this conversation, started working intentionally on 5 skills of happiness, it would be start with those five.
And is it reasonable to suggest, okay, if I'm listening to those five, there's probably going to be one of them that feels a bit less comfortable or that's a bit more intimidating? Maybe start there. Like
Yeah.
identifying your biggest gap might be where to dive into the five.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like to use the term green light theory, which is we all have an inner compass inside of us that I think is trying to nudge us towards a happy and fulfilling life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the mind yells where our intuition whispers. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
our mind gets real loud about what we're expected to do or should do or must do or what's on the to do list. And our gut instinct, our intuition is so often drowned out. Right.
Mm.
But that inner gut instinct, the best way I've seen it expressed is when we feel equally scared and excited about something or equally challenged and compelled by something, it's normally the right move. So if one of those 5 skills that I just mentioned, you were like, I feel somewhat drawn to it, but also somewhat resistant to it, or I feel somewhat excited and compelled by that, but also somewhat challenged and scared of it, that's your intuition trying to nudge you towards it. Follow it. Trust that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because actually, maybe most of those five makes me think of this question that I ask people all the time. And the reason it comes up is because it's the question that throws people the most. And it is, what do you want?
Yeah.
I don't know if you find this in your work. Every time I say to someone, "Well, what do you want?" and I've had clients burst into tears. Well, no one's ever asked me that. I have no idea what I want. It's like, well,
Yeah.
how do we get there? If we don't know where we're going, every road will take you there.
Yeah. I call it a notebook moment. We have this with our clients as well. That famous scene in the movie The Notebook.
Mm.
We're standing in the rain, Ryan Gosling's grabbing her by the shoulders. He's like, what do you want? And she's like, it's not that simple. And he goes, it is. What do you want? I love when I have a notebook moment with a client. I'm like,
Mm.
I think because part of me goes, I'm living out my fantasy of being Ryan Gosling for a moment. there's this little moment where I'm like, yes, I'm Ryan Gosling and you're Rachel McAdams and we're in the rain together and we're having this really meaningful conversation. But you're right. So many people can't answer it. Right? So it's a good question. It's like, what do you want?
Yeah, it's really intimidating, I think, because a lot of, and you know, a lot of us are kind of programmed and conditioned. I predominantly work in leadership coaching. So a lot of the people that I work with get to a position as a result of their giving to others and supporting others, and, you know, this idea of kind of servant leadership, which is wonderful. But when you get positive reinforcement from consistent giving, the idea of looking in the mirror is so daunting because you haven't seen that reflection for so long, because all you're doing is pouring out and identifying what the business needs or what your team needs or what your kids need or what your partner needs. And it can be a really confronting, simple but confronting question. So maybe I'm just going to make people stand in the rain when I ask
That
it.
would be gorgeous. Let's do that. More cinematic moments.
Right? I think so. I mean, my hair doesn't really respond well to the humidity, but we'll give it a go. I'm open. It's with the goal of happiness.
Exactly.
We have to just throw our bodies on the line for this. Okay. So if there was one thing that someone could do, like an exercise or one thing that you want everyone to take away, what would it be? I know that's a really hard question.
Yeah, I think if there was one paradigm shift in concept, I wish people. I'll break it into two. Okay, what's one paradigm shift in concept, and then what is one practical action? Right.
Perfect. Love that.
So the paradigm shift in concept that I wish everyone would take away is just really embracing this idea that happiness is a skill. Like you can learn about it, you can improve it, and like any other skill, you're gonna suck at it first. Like you're gonna practice these things and not do well at them. You're gonna try to journal and have no answers. You're gonna try to meditate, your mind's gonna wander. You're gonna try to practice emotional intelligence and get overwhelmed by your emotions. That is the point, right? I've never seen someone pick up a guitar, strum it once, then complain they weren't Jimi Hendrix. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they're gonna suck, right? It's the same as learning a language. We don't expect ourselves to magically be fluent in it. But when it comes to the skills of happiness, so often people go, oh, well, I tried meditation, it didn't work for me. Or I'm just not a confident person. Or I'm naturally quite, anxious and predisposed to anxiety. I'm like, yeah. But like, there are skills that you can learn to manage that more effectively. You just need to suck at it first. Right. So
Yeah.
embrace the fact that happiness is a skill. That would be the concept.
Can I,
Yes.
before you go into the exercise, I just on that, thinking of those 5 pillars that you've outlined, it's a lifelong skill, right? It's not like, I know that, you work with people for a year and they do get ongoing benefits, but I'm imagining that it's a skill that you practice consistently forever.
Yeah, because like any
right?
other skill, it gets rusty, right? Like if I
Yeah.
stop playing the guitar, I'm not going to play it as well later. If I stop speaking Spanish, I'm not going to speak it as well later. But also, the specific skills I'm using in that toolkit will change based on chapters of life. Like the 70 skills that we teach at BU, there might be 5 or 6 that are really relevant to your chapter of life right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5, 10 years goes by and you're like, oh, they're not the skills that I need right now. Like I need these other 5 out of the 70. And so you're right, it is this ongoing commitment and curious. And I openly say to people, I'm very grateful to now be perceived as an expert in the field of happiness, but I am a lifelong learner of the skills and science of happiness too. Right? Like I'm a student of this work, not just a teacher of it. And so I'd hope people embrace that paradigm and become curious about the skills and science of happiness, and they become lifelong learners of it, and they understand it is a skill. And then for a practice, if I was to ask people to do one thing, look, one of the best researched and cheapest and freest and least time consuming practices that we have that are correlated with happiness, be so much more open with gratitude. Yourself and to others. Like, I don't care if you're going to do it formally as like a gratitude journal or if you're just going to be more thankful to people in your life. There's so much that I think people are quick to point out what's not going well and we're quick to overlook what is going well in life. And again, that's a reflection of the negative cognitive bias. My dream is like if we had a world where people were just so much more skilled at practicing appreciation and gratitude, we'd create a better world. So, even little things, if you think something nice about someone, bloody text it to them. You'd be amazed what happens. Like I've been experimenting with that just for the last few months of like, hey, just want to let you know, man, you just crossed my mind today. I've been thinking of you. I hope you're doing the connection, especially in a world where we are becoming more disconnected and isolated and lonely, right?
Yeah.
The connection that forms, and also just practicing a little bit more gratitude towards yourself. Like, if you find that you do have a bit of a loud inner critic or imposter syndrome and self-doubt, and look, that's something I still wrestle with all these years later, there is so much usefulness about just finding little things that you like about yourself and just noticing them. Just point them out. Be like, you know what? I like this about myself, be it physically, character strength, personality trait, decision that you've made, whatever. I like this about me. If we can practice that a little bit more, yeah, it's going to go a long way to becoming happier.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And there's one question that I ask all of my guests, which is, what is one book that you recommend everyone read?
Oh, can I do
I
2?
know
Can I be
some
cheeky?
people give me 5, but
Actually, okay. I'm going to do 2. I'm going to be cheeky. So,
okay.
I think for like the rude wake up call, like go read Bronnie Ware's 5 Regrets of the Dying. I think it's a fantastic book and resource to kind of give people a bit of a wake up call of like, hey, we get one shot at life as far as we know. I don't know what people's spiritual beliefs are, but like, what we've got here,
Yeah, we get
let's
this life once.
let's do something with it, right? Let's be
Yeah.
so intentional about it. Let's not let it just slip through our fingers. And I don't know about you, but I'm just finding every year just passes quicker and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Time does not slow down for anyone. So that is a great book to kind of kickstart your motivation. Then I'm going to be super cheeky and I'm going to recommend a book that is not out yet, and it's my book.
Yay!
Yes, so I've finished writing the 5 skills of happiness. We don't have a title for it yet, but basically those skills I spoke about earlier. There's a whole chapter on each of them. We have just opened pre-registration for a waitlist for it, so I'll send through the link so
It
that
will
people
be
can
in the
click on,
caption below.
pop it in, say I'm interested. I want to grab this when it comes out. They're going to be the people who get first edition releases.
Amazing.
And I've tied it to one of our United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Part of me was like, I feel a little weird. Don't get me wrong. I'm sitting in front of our library at home. I have a lot of books. I love books. Part of me feels weird about the environmental impact it has to kind of like cut down a tree and make books. So I was like, you know what? For every book of mine that we sell, we're going to plant a tree. And so that's just built into the funding now. I've taken a little bit of the sliver of what I get as an author, which is already not much, and put that towards planting a tree. So it's a good thing for you to learn the skills. It's also just a good thing in the world. So if you're interested in what we're speaking about today, I'd love for you to sign up to that.
I am going to sign up as soon as we finish. Do you have an approximate release date in mind?
The original talk was we were hoping to get it out for Christmas 2025. I don't know if we're going to pull that one off. It might be more towards Easter 2026.
Still perfect rebirth kind of season, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they're 2
Yes,
very
right?
common like book release times, I found out. It's like a good time to get things on shelves. Apparently it's a common time that people buy books for each other.
Well, and also, just as a side note, I acknowledge how amazing and what a huge journey it would have been to create this book.
Yeah, 3
And
years. Thank you.
right, but and also the ripples that it will have, because I do, like we said before, there's this almost like urgency of, we've got to tell the people. Someone tell the people that you could be happier tomorrow. You can start doing this, and the fact that you've put that together to share is very generous, and also I think it's going to have a huge impact. So congratulations on even creating it.
Thank
It's
you so much.
remarkable.
I appreciate it.
So, and also thank you for coming. Thank you for being on, I was going to say on the show, like I'm
Yeah,
Oprah.
that's spot on. I think so. Look, if the book was already out, we could have had an Oprah moment to be like, you get a book, but now we'll just do you get on the wait list for a book.
Yeah, you can buy a book.
Yeah.
Everyone who's listening to this has the opportunity to purchase a book.
A first release one. Let's give him something good.
I'm going to be on the list, but thank you. And even just being on this episode, and having this conversation and putting this out into the world is going to have ripples. And I know for myself, I've got so much from this conversation. And I also know that anyone whose ears we are currently in is probably feeling a little bit more empowered, a little bit more hopeful, and certainly a little bit happier as a result of your sharing. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who did choose to have us in their ears today and take a little bit of time out of your week and life. And if you've loved this conversation and you've gotten really curious about the skills and science of happiness, and you're a podcast person, which I'm guessing you are because you're listening to a podcast, I'd love to invite you across to ours. We've relaunched our podcast this year. It's called How to Be Happy. And every week we put out episodes about the skills and science of happiness. So if this has wet your whistle and you've gotten really curious about the skills and science of happiness, come across and join us there as well.
Perfect. I love that. Well, thank you, everyone. It's always a privilege to spend time in people's ears and to learn from wise, happy beings like yourself, Declan. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.